A scream tore through the house close to midnight. I was upstairs when I heard Helen, my mother-in-law, shouting Marcus's name, her voice shaking and so angry it sounded like it might break. Then came rushed footsteps outside, neighbors knocking, people calling out to each other. I ran down the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I couldn't breathe. The only thing I saw before everything blew up was Marcus's face, pale as a sheet, and my mother-in-law trembling so badly she had to grip the edge of the table. And then I heard myself wondering, how did we end up here? A week before that, I was standing in the kitchen with Marcus. It was nothing big. I said I wanted to order dinner because I'd worked all day. But Marcus looked at me like I'd suggested something outrageous. "Don't spend any more," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp and cold, not how he usually talked to me. I stood still for a moment, trying to steady my voice. "Just for today, okay?" Marcus shook his head, more confused than annoyed. That look on his face, a kind of tension I couldn't read, kept showing up more and more in those days. Marcus and I weren't like this. Before we moved into his mom's house, we were doing fine. I freelanced, and Marcus worked in finance. He was organized about everything, but he never told me what I could or couldn't buy. We used to share accounts, share every decision, big or small. I trusted him completely. When Marcus said he wanted to live with Helen for a few months to save money, I didn't hesitate. The house was big and quiet, and Helen seemed happy to have company. I thought it would bring us closer. I was wrong, though I didn't know it then. The changes started quietly. The first time I realized something was off was when I bought a few small decorations. Marcus asked the price immediately, not out of curiosity, but like he was checking up on me. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face didn't change. Then eating out was completely cut off. Even small expenses got questioned. I kept thinking he was just stressed from work, but even at home, he carried this invisible pressure with him. Another time, I casually mentioned replacing some old kitchen tools. He stared at me for a long moment and said, "No need. Don't spend more." The words themselves were normal, but in his voice there was something that felt almost like fear. Fear of what? I had no idea. I just knew I no longer felt like we were standing on the same ground. The longer we stayed there, the more I felt my mother-in-law knew more than she let on. She was gentle, always saved the dessert I liked, always asked if I'd slept well. But there was one thing I couldn't forget. The look in her eyes whenever Marcus mentioned money. She froze, like the word touched an old wound. One evening, I went to get some water and heard her voice from her room. Her tone was low, strained. "We can't keep going like this." I froze. I knew she wasn't talking about me, but her words hit me harder than anything Marcus had ever said. By then, I started to see there was a tight, tense thread between the two of them that I hadn't touched yet. Something quiet and unstable, and it was starting to spill over onto me. In the days that followed, Marcus became so different, I barely recognized the man I used to lean on. He was still caring out of habit, still asked if I'd slept well, but everything was quick and disconnected, like his mind was somewhere else. I watched him over and over, trying to find the person I knew, but all I saw were tired eyes and shoulders drawn tight, like he was holding a ticking bomb. At dinner, Helen looked at Marcus as if she was trying to pull him back to reality, but Marcus kept his eyes down, avoiding everyone, and I stood between them, realizing I was only seeing the surface of something sinking underneath. Then that night, Marcus told me to sit down because he needed to talk. I still remember him taking a long breath before he spoke. "We should separate our bank accounts. From now on, we each manage our own money." I thought I'd misheard him. We'd promised we wouldn't let anything come between us, especially money. I asked why. Marcus only said, "To keep things clear," But his face told me something else. He was hiding something much bigger. When I turned, I saw my mother-in-law standing in the doorway, her hands gripping the frame so hard her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes held a kind of worry I didn't even have a name for. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever was coming was far bigger than anything I'd imagined. When Marcus got up and walked to the bedroom after that short sentence, I stayed at the dinner table, my hands on my lap, unable to feel anything. I didn't know how long it took before I realized the house had gone so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the living room. I wanted to go after him, but I also wanted to hold on to whatever dignity I had left. I couldn't understand why the man who once shared everything with me was now drawing lines like we were just two people living under the same roof with nothing to do with each other. The next morning, Marcus handed me a small notebook and said that from now on, every expense had to be recorded. He said it gently, but firmly. He'd already listed everything: who paid for electricity, who paid for water, who bought groceries, who covered which part of the household costs. He even suggested we split things based on our income ratio. On paper, it sounded reasonable, but it didn't feel right. I sat there listening like a stranger being assigned a responsibility that didn't belong to me. I asked him if he was sure this was what he wanted. Marcus just nodded, avoiding my eyes. He repeated what he'd said the night before. I want everything to be clear. How clear, he didn't say. I tried to press gently, especially seeing how tense he was. Is there something you're not telling me? Work, family, or some other pressure? Marcus just frowned slightly and said there was nothing. When I brought up his income, something we'd always been open about, he snapped almost instantly. Don't ask about that anymore. I can handle it. Hearing that felt like a wall was being built between us, and I was standing on the outside, unable to see what was happening on the other side. In the days that followed, the air in the house grew so heavy that every meal felt hard to swallow. Marcus still sat across from me, still handed me chopsticks when I forgot, still asked if work had tired me out, but everything felt hollow, like he was repeating old habits without any real connection behind them. I caught him looking at me more than once, his eyes on the verge of saying something before he quickly looked away, as if letting me see him for even a second would expose whatever he was trying so hard to hide. I started to wonder if he was seeing someone else, not because I'd seen any clear signs, but because I couldn't explain how he had drifted from me so fast. Then I wondered if he'd lost his job, or if something serious had happened at his company. My thoughts spun in circles. I asked, he dodged. I stayed quiet, he stayed quiet. We lived in the same house, but no longer met anywhere in the middle. During that time, Helen was the one trying to patch the space between us. She asked Marcus if he needed help, asked me if I was okay. She made the dishes I liked and left them ready in the kitchen. She tried to spark light conversations, talking about little things from her day to ease the tension. But whenever she mentioned that a family needed to understand each other, her voice dipped. Sometimes she turned to Marcus as if she was about to say something important, but when she met his eyes, she went quiet and changed the subject to the weather. Every day, I felt more and more that her worry wasn't only for me, but for Marcus too. Still, she said nothing, and I didn't dare ask. I was afraid the answer would make everything fall apart even faster. One night, when Marcus came home later than usual, I saw Helen sitting in the living room, her hands gripping the edge of her sleeve. I sat down next to her and gently asked if something was worrying her. She shook her head, forced a smile, said she was just tired, but her eyes said something else. She stared at the door like she was waiting for something bad to walk through it. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat with her for a while. When Marcus stepped inside, she froze, got up faster than normal, and went straight to her room without another word. The scene sent a chill down my back. Clearly there was something going on between them, and I was in the middle, yet not allowed to know. The next night, I sat alone in the kitchen. Marcus had gone to bed early, and Helen wasn't moving around like she usually did. The house was so quiet, I could hear the living room clock ticking. I looked at the notebook Marcus had given me and flipped a few pages. All the expenses I'd been tracking these past days stared back at me like proof of something drifting far off the path a marriage should follow. And then I saw something that made my hands go cold. At the back of the notebook, on the page Marcus used for his own expenses, there was a large cash withdrawal. No purpose listed, no note. I stared at that number as if it could explain itself. But it just sat there, silent, like a final period on all the assumptions I'd been trying to hold on to. My chest tightened. It wasn't the amount that hurt. It was the secrecy. A secret big enough that Marcus was willing to build an entire system of clarity just to hide it. I set the notebook down on the table, and for the first time since all this began, I felt afraid. Not afraid of what I'd seen, but of what I hadn't seen yet. From the moment I saw that missing amount in the notebook, I couldn't hold on to the calm I used to have. It stayed with me day and night. Every time Marcus opened a cabinet, pulled out his wallet, or checked his phone, I found myself watching him without meaning to. I didn't want to be suspicious, but I couldn't stop thinking about that money. Every theory ran through my head like scattered film clips, none of them ending in anything good. One afternoon, I decided to follow Marcus after work. He said he had to stop by the office late. I kept a reasonable distance, trying not to let him notice. But only a few minutes later, when his car stopped at a busy intersection, another car cut between us. By the time I got around it, Marcus's car had vanished from the road. I drove through a few blocks trying to find him, but couldn't. The helplessness hit me like cold water to the face. I hadn't just lost track of him on the street. I was losing track of him inside our own marriage. In the nights that followed, I started losing sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind slip through the window, listening to Helen's footsteps downstairs. I thought about why Marcus had changed, about the look in Helen's eyes every time he walked into the room. I didn't know if I was searching for answers or trying to save something that had already cracked long ago. The more uneasy I felt, the more I realized Helen was just as unsettled. Every time Marcus walked into the kitchen, she flinched a little, like she wasn't ready. Once, he only opened a cabinet to get a glass of water, and she reacted as if she'd heard a loud crash. Marcus didn't notice it, but I did. She watched him with eyes full of worry and hurt, like someone who already knows a storm is coming, but has no idea how to warn anyone. That night, when the three of us were eating, no one said much. I tried offering Helen more of the vegetables she liked, and when I set the plate near her, she suddenly grabbed my hand. Her hand was cold and shaking. She spoke very softly, as if she was afraid Marcus might hear. "There are things you shouldn't blame him for." But when I looked into her eyes to ask what she meant, she bit her lip and cut herself off. She just lowered her head and quietly kept eating, leaving me with the sharp feeling that she was protecting Marcus from something that wasn't small. I looked at Marcus then. His head was down, silent. But I could feel the tension around him like a thick shell no one could reach through. The distance between us grew clearer every day. At night, he came home late without explaining. In the morning, he left before I woke up. When I asked if he could tell me what was going on, he only said, "Stop asking." The first time he said it, it hurt and made me angry. But by the second and third time, I realized he truly wanted to shut every door that led to the truth. One night, after I asked him directly about the missing money, Marcus pushed back from the dinner table so fast his chair scraped the floor. His voice cracked. "I told you to stop asking. You don't understand how hard I'm trying." I froze. Helen sat beside us with her hands clenched tightly together. In that moment, the fear in her eyes was even stronger than mine. This wasn't just a marital argument. Something much heavier was weighing on Marcus, and I started to fear I wouldn't have the strength to hear the truth if he ever said it out loud. But it was the smaller moments afterward that worried me more than any argument ever could. One evening, I went out to take the trash and saw Marcus's car parked in the driveway. The lights were off, but he was still inside. I walked closer and saw him hunched over, his hands gripping his head like he was fighting something too big to hold. I wanted to knock on the window, to ask what he was carrying, but my feet stopped. I realized he wasn't just tired. He was collapsing, little by little, in a place I couldn't reach. Then the strange calls started. His phone rang while he was in the shower. I saw the screen light up with an unknown number, just a string of digits. When he came out, I handed him the phone. He looked at it for 1 second, then shut it off immediately and said, "Wrong number." But the way he gripped the phone, squeezing it like he wanted to snap it in half, told me it wasn't a mistake. I didn't ask. I didn't have the courage anymore. Every question seemed to push him deeper into his defensive shell, and I was exhausted from the silence. One afternoon, while I was folding clothes in our room, I heard a loud crash from Helen's room. Not the sound of something slipping. It sounded like something had been thrown. I ran over, opened the door, and found her on the floor. A picture frame had shattered, glass scattered everywhere. She was crying, her shoulders shaking. I rushed to help her up, but she pushed my hands away gently, as if she didn't want anyone touching the pain she was carrying. She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, and said between broken breaths, "This is going to explode. It can't stay hidden forever." I froze, not because of the words themselves, but because they didn't sound like a complaint. They sounded like a warning, and I knew somehow that whatever was about to explode was tied directly to Marcus and to us. I kept hearing Helen's words replay in my head all afternoon. They made it hard to focus. Even standing felt unsteady. The air in the house felt thick with something nameless and uneasy. When Marcus got home, I tried to talk to him, but as soon as I opened my mouth, he said he was tired and wanted to rest upstairs. I watched him go, full of questions, but too drained for another silent standoff. That night was unusually cold. I'd just finished preparing dinner when I heard Helen's footsteps on the stairs, slow and heavy. I assumed she was tired too, so I didn't call her down. I set the table for 3, but I was the only one who sat. Marcus had locked himself in the room upstairs, and Helen never came down. The house was big, but it felt small, like a sealed space running out of air. I was washing dishes when suddenly a scream tore up from downstairs. Not a normal scream. It was the kind that breaks out of someone in pure desperation and fury. I knew instantly it was my mother-in-law. I dropped the bowl in my hand and ran down the stairs. The neighbors heard it too. Doors opened, their light spilling into our yard. A few stepped over, calling, "Is everything okay?" But I couldn't answer. I just ran. When I reached the living room, I saw Helen standing there, barely holding herself up, pointing at Marcus. Marcus stood a few steps away, but their eyes were locked like they were caught in a storm only the two of them understood. Helen screamed, her voice shaking, cracking. "How long are you going to hide it? Marcus, how long are you going to hide it from your wife?" I stopped cold. My whole body went rigid. Marcus turned toward me, his eyes filled with panic, like he knew the moment he feared most had finally arrived. He reached out as if to steady his mother, but she pulled away from him like he was something dangerous. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice breaking like he was holding himself together by a thread. "I just wanted to fix it before Nora found out." The neighbors started murmuring. A few stood by the doorway, none of them stepping inside, but all trying to see what was happening. I heard scattered whispers. "What's going on? Are they okay? Sounds like a big fight." I didn't care about any of them. My eyes were on Marcus, the man I once trusted completely, now standing in front of me like a stranger. Helen was almost sobbing as she pointed at him again. He's in debt. Nora, do you hear me? He's in debt. He hid it from you. He's been trying to handle it alone. He's destroying himself. My face burned hot, then went ice cold. A ringing sound drowned out everything else. Debt. Marcus was in debt. The large withdrawal wasn't for someone else. It was to cover this. Marcus closed his eyes, taking a shaky breath. I didn't want to disappoint her. I thought I could manage it. I thought I just needed more time. Helen was so upset her voice was barely holding together. Time? You're sinking deeper every day. You think she hasn't noticed? You've scared her, Marcus. You've pushed her out of your life. I couldn't speak. Every word I might have said felt stuck somewhere deep in my chest. My whole body felt both weightless and aching. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes shattered. Nora? He took a step toward me. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to find out like this. I didn't want you to feel the pressure of my mistakes. Helen shook her head, tears streaming down her face. He made risky investments, Nora. He put almost all his savings into them. He lost most of it. He thought he could pay the debt off himself. Thought hiding it from you was the right thing. So all the controlling, all the rules about money, all the changes in him, it wasn't because he wanted to push me away or turn me into someone else. It was because he was trying to keep a leaking boat afloat without letting me see it was already sinking. My heart tightened. I suddenly understood why Helen was so afraid for him. She knew her son was falling apart in a way no one could help if he kept hiding everything. I stepped closer, trying to keep my voice steady. Marcus, why didn't you tell me? Why did you shut me out of all this? He looked at me, his face exhausted. I was afraid you'd think I was a failure. I was afraid you'd leave. I was afraid you'd look at me differently. I was angry. Angry that I'd been shut out of my own husband's battle. Angry that he treated me like someone who couldn't handle the truth. Angry that our marriage had been stretched so thin because he didn't trust me enough. But when I looked at Marcus, collapsing, shoulders trembling, eyes red, hands unable to find a place to rest, I saw something bigger than anger. Absolute fear. The kind of fear that comes from fighting so hard on your own that you start breaking without realizing it. I turned to Helen. She had sunk into a chair, holding her head, crying and gasping for breath. The neighbors slowly backed away, probably realizing they shouldn't stay. The door closed, leaving the three of us in a heavy space where every breath felt loud. Marcus dropped to his knees in front of me, his trembling hand barely touching my leg, as if asking permission. His voice was hoarse, so quiet I had to lean down to hear him. I'm not afraid of losing the money. He swallowed hard. I'm afraid of losing you. That sentence stopped every chaotic sound around me. I felt something squeeze tight in my chest. I wanted to say something, wanted to react, wanted to reach out and pull him up, but I couldn't. My voice was stuck somewhere behind all the emotions crashing into each other. Hurt, anger, sympathy, fear. I only knew one thing. The truth now lying between us had changed everything, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to choose what came next. The room went quiet, except for Marcus's unsteady breathing and Helen's soft sobs behind him. And between the two of them, I stood there, unsure whether the next step would save us or break us even more. After the neighbors left and the last door closed, the house fell back into a frightening silence. No voices, no whispers, just the heavy breathing of three people who had been hit by a storm none of us were ready for. Marcus went upstairs at Helen's request to calm down, and I sat beside her. Her shoulders were still trembling, but her hand on mine wasn't as cold as before. She let out a long breath, and for the first time she didn't try to hide the worry in her eyes. He's always thought he had to be the successful one, the strong one, the one who makes you proud. Marcus has always been the kind of child who holds everything inside until he can't anymore, just like his father. I sat quietly and listened. It turned out Marcus had been carrying a weight no one asked him to carry. The expectations he thought I had for him were really just the voice in his own mind, a voice pushing him farther and farther from the person he was trying to protect most. I squeezed her hand gently. I just wish he told me sooner. She looked at me with tired but gentle eyes. He's scared you'll see him differently. But he loves you. That much I know. When I went upstairs to find Marcus, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head down, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. Something about the way he looked made my chest ache. He heard me and lifted his head. No words came out at first, only his eyes, red, wet, overwhelmed. "I'm sorry." Marcus's voice cracked on the very first syllable. "I made everything worse. I made you go through things you never should have had to. I was afraid you'd be disappointed in me, afraid you wouldn't see me the same anymore." I sat beside him. Not too close, but close enough so he knew I wasn't avoiding him. "I don't need a perfect husband, Marcus. I need an honest one, someone who lets me carry things with him instead of shutting me out." Marcus pressed a hand to his chest, like admitting it hurt but eased something in him at the same time. "I know, and I was wrong, really wrong." I took a deep breath. This was the moment to speak before anger could ever return and twist it. "We're going to deal with this together, but from now on, everything has to be transparent. No more secrets, no more making me guess or worry, and no more fighting alone." Marcus nodded, slow but steady, like he'd been waiting a long time to hear those words. "I promise. No more distance, no more hiding." A small relief settled in my chest, faint, but enough to remind me there was still hope. We sat there for a while, not talking, just letting the quiet fill in the spaces secrets had carved out. When I went back downstairs, it felt like stepping out of the thick fog I'd been lost in for weeks. The hurt was still there, and the unanswered questions were still there, but the darkest part had started to fade. I realized that sometimes the truth doesn't show up to destroy a relationship. It shows up to reveal where we need to be stronger, more honest. I once thought the cracks were the end, but now I understand. Cracks can also be where the light gets in. I looked around the house. A place that had been filled with tension now felt calm in a different way. Not calm because the problems were gone, but calm because we'd finally stopped running from them. In the end, I learned that the real strength of a marriage isn't in avoiding mistakes, but in being able to rise together after you fall. Marcus and I still have a lot to fix, a lot to face, but now at least we're standing on the same side. And looking back on all of this, I can't help asking myself, if the person you love hides their struggles because they're afraid of disappointing you, how would you respond? What about you? Let me know in the comments. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for supporting us.